Good afternoon and welcome back to WHYY News' Civic News Summit. I'm Sarah Glover, Vice President of News and Civic Dialogue here at WHYY, and I'm so honored to be joined by Candice Fortman, who has a wonderful resume, and I'll just share a few highlights, and then I'm going to have her introduce herself. But she's a current JSK fellow at Stanford University, and she's the former executive director at Outlier Media. So, Candice, let's just jump right in. Tell us about your career and your journey, your professional journey from start to present.
Sure. So my resume is all about my love affair with the city of Detroit, the city that raised me, and that up until August I called home. I have spent my career trying to figure out how to fall more deeply in love with Detroit and help people discover and fall in love with the city that I saw, but also being realistic about the real challenges facing said city, which meant that at some point I was going to have to build something. I always say that Outlier is my love letter to Detroit. We built a newsroom to be of service to the folks who helped raise me and put me in places like Stanford. I would not be at Stanford talking about and building the, thinking about the future of news without the folks in Detroit who taught me how to build, how to organize, how to love my community, and also how to seed something into the ground. I started my career, I saw it was mentioned, working in commercial radio. So I started off at iHeartMedia. It was Clear Channel when I was there. And then I worked for Wayne State University, doing some interesting work there. And then I ended up at WDET, which is Detroit's public radio station, so the WHYY of Detroit. And while I was at WDET, I had the great the great moment of my life to meet who would become my business partner and one of my closest friends, Sarah Alvarez, who had been working on this model for journalism that really thought about journalism as a useful service, not just as words printed, but how can we make that service useful? But more importantly, how can we identify what communities need to know by their own identification? So what Detroiters tell us they need to know in order to, in our beginning, in order to survive in the city, and then as we grew bigger, in order to thrive in the city. So making sure that we help people both as they're trying to survive, housing, utilities, navigating local government, and then of course how to thrive, arts, culture, education, how to live in a city fully.
Excellent. Let's just jump right into the model that Outlier Media evokes, and from the beginning to present, and technology plays a pivotal role in Outlier's existence. Could you talk about how that startup mentality and how that innovation kind of, it kind of blossomed from the beginning to present, and how technology has played a role with the newsroom?
Yeah. So Outlier was built to be a challenge to traditional existing media. We both coming from newsrooms that we thought were doing good work, but we're not going far enough in order to fill information gaps in a community. And information gaps are where accountability for us, what we have found, where accountability goes to die. So what we do first and to this day is that we do an information needs assessment. That has been our motto since our beginning almost 10 years ago, where we ask a representative group of Detroiters, if you had a reporter working with you over the next 48 hours, what challenge would you have them solve for you? We also ask a number of other questions, but we also look at open data. We look at census tract information, questions asked to United Way, questions asked to city council members, so that we can understand what people are asking questions about. Because where you see people in your community asking questions are often where there are accountability gaps that you need to fill. And that is how we choose our beats of reporting. But when we say beats of reporting, I want to go a little bit further for people. It's not just the thing we cover, it's where we decide to put the resources that we have. So particularly in the beginning when we had no money, and I do mean no money, because we were not paying ourselves for a while there, we needed to make sure that the little bit of money we had was used to be of good service to Detroiters. That is why the only thing we covered was housing and utilities, because Detroiters told us those were the areas where they were struggling the most to get good information in order to make decisions for themselves. Because it was not our job to make the decisions. We know that Detroiters are smart enough to make decisions for themselves. But you cannot make good decisions if you do not have good information. And so it was not just about going out and reporting, it's also how you deliver that information. And so before we ever built a website, we built a text message platform. So no matter whether you pay too much money to Verizon like I do, or you were able to get your phone off a corner, like one of the free phones we got off the corner, and we call them Obama phones. I don't think we should be calling them Obama phones, but you know what I'm talking about. My aunt had one of those phones. But right, but we wanted to make sure that regardless of whether you had some fancy iPhone that you've paid too much money for or a less expensive government phone, we could reach you. And so to this day, our number one service is our text message platform where people can text us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 or 66 days a year to get information around housing, utilities. In the beginning, that was all we covered. That was all we had the resources to cover. But now you text that platform because we've rebuilt it, and you'll be talking to a reporter in our newsroom about any matter of subjects, the things that you need to know in order to survive, in order to thrive, and get good information.
I just want to take a pause here and a round of applause because I am a fangirl of this thought process, critical thinking, and approach to journalism, but really to put that all together as the most scrappiest, news startup concept that is built on technology. This is really revolutionary, and we're going to continue to talk about Outlier, but I want to segue that into you and your commitment. And what's the beautiful theme about this convening in the summit is like we're not trying to hold all this in to ourselves. So understand, Candice is at Stanford a year studying in the night fellowships to be able to bring this model to other newsrooms. And so she's working on a system so that other people can follow the lead of Outlier. And just literally, we need to stop and give you and Sarah and others an applause. And because I have a mic, you guys can make the sound, but I'm also applauding. But it's remarkable. This is game changing, and again, back to the spirit of it only takes one or two people with a great idea to make change in a community. Could you go down a little further down the road on that SMS service? How did you start it with Outlier, and where are you heading to? This has been on my docket. I know I've DM'd you over the past years about in my next newsroom, we're going to be launching an SMS. We're going to do that at WHYY. So there's our headline local for our local news servicing. But take us through the journey of how you implemented this.
I want to start by saying that the important thing about the technology is not the technology. The SMS system is a means to an end. If I thought that buying a pigeon farm and sending out pigeons to get information to Detroiters was a more useful way to get them information, we would have bought a pigeon farm. My intention was to ensure that we had a tool that was built that brought equity to the information distribution. That we could ensure, because what we found is that Detroit was a city where not everybody had access to Wi-Fi or internet in their home, which meant that building a website didn't make a lot of sense if we were trying to reach the most hard-to-reach news consumers. But almost everybody had access to a cell phone, no matter what the quality of that cell phone was. That meant that if you were unhoused on the streets, you could still get to us. Right, that our newsroom was accessible to you. Accessibility of your newsroom is invaluable. How you decide to distribute your information is as important as the information that you distribute. And so that is why we started with the text system. It is also why we've done things like print things when we needed to. At one point, I was going into grocery stores, and you know how in grocery stores and neighborhoods, they'll have like the bulletin board? I was printing out flyers with like the thing you could pull down with a tab with our text message number on it. Whatever I thought in my brain that I could do in order to get information into the folks that we needed to reach, that's what we were doing. We threw everything at the wall that we could afford to throw at the wall, right? Because again, especially in the beginning when we had literally no money, being able to be scrappy really allowed for us to be incredibly innovative. You hear a lot of startup people talk about how much they miss the early days. It's because your innovation is so high, because when you don't have any money in the bank, you got to think real hard about how you're going to get to folks. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we did, and the thing that I think is most important, is to put our feet on the ground and get in community. To this day, we still host a monthly coffee hour. We move that coffee hour around the city to a different coffee shop. One, bringing money into small coffee shops. These are all locally owned coffee shops across the city. We pay for an hour and a half or so. We pay for every coffee or tea that you come in and drink. And if all you do is walk in the door and get a coffee and a tea and decide not to talk to us, well enough. But most folks want to stop and have a conversation because I think most people are not used to newsrooms wanting to talk to them, wanting to listen to them. But as a lifelong Detroiter, I want to know your story. I'm nosy about Detroit stories. And I think that nosiness can also be called curiosity in another way. But I call it nosiness. I want to know what's happening on a side of the city I don't live on. Because we also get so stuck in our own little areas of the city, right? And so I want to know, I'll go on this side, and I'm like, well, girl, why is that happening over here? And people are interested and they tell us, and because they see us, they also call us when they really need information. Maybe not that day, but another day, right? I don't know if I fully answered your question.
You hit it out the park. She swung the bat on that. So tell us a little bit about your experience in the fellowship program, and you can tell us like how it's going for you, but also just amplify how fellowships are a great opportunity for mid-career veteran, even emerging journalists. More emerging journalists are getting fellowships, and how that pit stop for you has kind of transformed your career.
I think so much about the essay I wrote in order to get into this fellowship, and one of the stories I told was how my mom was a block club president. I come from a long line of block club presidents, and so when we got our first family computer in 1990, whatever year it was, I'm not going to tell you that, because then you'll know how old I am. But whatever year that was when we got that family home computer, my mother said, I need you to get on that computer and make a flyer to tell people that trash day is changing. In Detroit, we used to have our trash cans in the alley. And so you would throw your trash in a big trash bin, but we were moving to those individual trash cans, right? And we needed to communicate how that was going to change how you use the alley, because we, knew our neighbors well enough to know that some folks were still going to throw trash in the alley even though there wasn't a trash bin out there. And so my mom was, I always say, was my first assignment editor. She was the first person who gave me an assignment to inform a community about a change happening. And that is the same spirit I brought to Stanford, right? I am thinking often about why I do this work, why we inform communities, why we talk to our neighbors, why we must build community first as newsrooms. And from there, everything else will form. The technology you build, the resources that you need to do it should be foundationally set on your why. My North Star is to be of service, like to be useful. I don't want to leave this life with anything left in me. I want to have completely emptied my body of usefulness, both to myself, to my family, and of course to the communities that I live in. And so at Stanford, that's what I'm running around thinking about. How can I become more useful? Some of that is by becoming a healthier version of myself. I was running myself ragged. At the end of Outlier, I was spent. I really was. And so I really needed to come back into my own brain, back into my own body, to recenter myself, to remember I'm a whole human who also deserves service, who also deserves care, who also deserves health. And so I've spent a lot of time doing that. But I've also spent a lot of time in the humanities classes, because damn us for forgetting that the humanities are important, that literature is important, that art is important, right? How we see ourselves is in the pages of books that have already been written before us, and maybe in the pages of books that we'll write once we are re-inspired in that way. And so I have spent a lot of time learning how to write plays, learning how, taking a meditation class, and also learning from my other incredible fellows. It's an international fellowship, so there are fellows from all over the world, from Malawi to Russia, Venezuela, Colombia, and learning methodologies and tools that I didn't know existed. They have taught me more than I could have ever imagined learning, and have made me a fuller and better human being.
Well, you are definitely full, and the cup runneth over, because
honestly, look out the window.
Yes, and out the window we're seeing an American flag strolling by. We're seeing protesters strolling by. Like, this is the cornerstone of democracy. And, quite frankly, in 2026, we'll celebrate the 250th birthday of the United States of America, which we know the birthplace is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, literally right outside the door. It's an honor to work at WHYY on Independence Mall, just blocks away, where the forefathers put this whole concept of what we call American democracy together, and how the press and how journalists play a vital role in upholding democracy, uniquely the only profession covered by the Constitution. And so every day we need to take our responsibility as journalists to the next level and to the highest level. And community engagement in civic news really plays an integral part in that exercise. You kind of touched upon this, but I wanted to go a little further on how newsrooms effectively can build trust via their community-centered work, and how does trust play a role in just the whole news-making process and distribution process? Because you guys are trusted. Your work is trusted.
I tell folks all the time that are building newsrooms, I can teach you the methodologies. I cannot teach your staff to care. If they do not care, it will show up in your work. And so when we are hiring, when I have hired first and foremost for care. Do you actually walk in this door every day thinking about the citizens of this city as your neighbors? Not as people you're reporting on, not as people that you're studying, not as people you're observing, but are these your neighbors, right? And will you treat them as such? But there are real tools that you can build into your editorial processes that that check for trust, that check for authenticity. I heard one of our friends here really bring up a beautiful question. I wrote down in my notebook, by the way, about what is a trusted voice. How do you define a trusted voice? And when we say that to our neighbors, when we say that to our audiences, do they understand what we mean? And honestly, it was the first time I thought about it from the other end. Like, wow, right, who is a trusted voice? And how do we define that? Right? I think one of the most important tools that we can do, and it's the first time I saw it done really well, and we do this now too, was at an incredible organization in Memphis called MOK 50, founded by Wendy Thomas, who was an incredible reporter, but also founder of this newsroom. And MOK 50 has a definitions glossary on their website. So when you hear us say things in our reporting, here's what this means, because there's an assumption that everybody's just going to understand these things we learned in J school, these things we learned at journalism conferences, that they're just ubiquitous language that everybody uses, which is, of course, not true, because we're often talking inside baseball, right? And assuming that our communities understand that. And so instead, we're going to teach you what these things mean. And then also, when possible, we're going to drop that unnecessary language and speak plainly. Just say the thing as it is, right? And stop trying to prove to awards bodies that our work is important so we can win our next Pulitzer, right? If the Pulitzer community can't keep up with us, then that's their problem. Sorry, Pulitzer community. Please give me a Pulitzer one day.
You're on a live stream, so I think everybody heard that loud and clear, right?
Great.
But for merit purposes, yes, you're doing excellent work.
Thank you, I appreciate that. But no, it really is important that the industry keep up with community and not keep asking the community to keep up with us. We need to be asking our communities what it is they need from us, how they need us to say things plainly, and do it in that way. And there is a give and take on that.
Very good, very good. Could you give some advice for micro or small publishers? I really appreciated the coffee tea meetup strategy. Are there other strategies at WHYY News? We're parlaying pop-up newsrooms where we go into small neighborhoods and we small businesses, small neighborhoods in particular, and make it very hyper-local, so it's a reach out and touch. Curious what strategies else you're using.
I've spent some time in the hallway speaking to another one of your attendees who's an organizer. And shout out to organizers who have been showing us how to do this work forever. Whatever organizers are doing, journalism organizations should be doing, especially small ones, especially those that are trying to be hyper-local. Organizers have been going ahead of us doing this work and getting, their feet on the ground, getting their material in the hands of people who need it most. And so there are real things that you can be learning from the organizing community about how to, particularly how to disseminate information, how to get it into the hands of folks who need it most. So that would be my first place to start, is to, one, partner with an organizing body if you can. We've done that a lot at Outlier, particularly when we were trying to disseminate housing information. We work with a very trusted housing organization, and they did a lot of work with disseminating our newsletters, making sure that our guides, because like we would do guides to how to buy a house in cash, because Detroit was a, particularly back then, was a big cash market for housing. And so we wrote a guide on how to buy a house, how to keep your money safe. And we distributed that information through that housing organization. They already had the people, they had the audience. Why do we need to build it? That's their audience, right? And so making sure that you're thinking about what communities you need to partner with, but more importantly, know from day one the thing you're trying to ultimately build, so that when the money eventually hits the bank, because if you're doing the work, hopefully the money will hit the bank. And the day that the money hits the bank, you already have a plan in place to get the money working. You don't want the money sitting in your bank while you sit up there and think about how we're going to spend the money. Baby, the day you put that check in my bank account, we're already hiring, right? We've already put our job description out, because we already believe so much in the future of our work and the necessity of our work that we had already built what was going to happen. We just needed the check from you.
Make it plain. That was making it plain, wasn't it? I want to go back to technology, and this is an area, artificial intelligence is not on the horizon, but it's here. It's been here. It's not going nowhere. What aspects of technology, particularly around AI, do you see as that can be integrated into newsrooms readily right now, and how do you manage or handle thinking about what to pass on, what to study and take a closer look at and see how it evolves? Or are AI or machine-based learning tools the best approach for a lot of newsrooms at this point? What are your thoughts around that?
If it can remove friction, that's fine. If it can, particularly on the business side, and I think that we're talking about civic news, so I don't want to talk too much about the business side. But on the business side, there are a lot of ways that AI can be really useful, not just for journalism organizations, for anybody running a small, particularly community-based organization. There is a lot of friction AI can take out of your work. We could talk about that at a different time. But
you want to define friction?
Yes. So taking out unnecessary work that clogs you from being able to do the actual work. Can it write your emails for your community? Can you give it a list of names and turn it into a mail merge for you, so you don't have to make another mail merge? Because honestly, if I never had to do, I think my mic went out.
Bring your hand up a little bit at the bottom.
If I never had to create another mail merge, I'd be happy, right? These are the things that AI can do for you that are incredibly useful, that don't have ethical mushiness in it. On the editorial side, that is a very different conversation. And every newsroom needs to be thinking about, well, should have already thought about what their process, what their policy is going to be, and that policy should be forward-facing. When you go to that organization's website, if they are using AI, you should have an understanding of how that's being used, how it impacts you, what systems they are using. We do use some AI technology in our new SMS system, particularly on the friction side, right? And so if you go to our new service, because we don't, in our SMS service, we're not sending out long-form articles. That's something I should probably mention also, I think, important to AI. When a person is in an information crisis, 1,000 words is not very useful. I don't have time to read 1,000 words about how to save my house. I need to know what phone number to call to save my house. I need to know what representative to call to save my house. And so that's what our SMS system does, right? It gives you that bite-sized piece of information you need now, and then we'll go write the 1,000 words later to talk to policymakers and legislators and city council folks to help them understand the problem. But our job is to save you in the now, right? And so AI can really help you in figuring out what those bite-sized pieces of information are that you can send out. But you still have to fact-check AI. You still have to do the human journalism of the moment. So even if they tell us that the number for that city council person is blah, 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 we're going to pick up the phone, call and say, is this city council person's blah, blah, blah's office? Is this the right phone number to make sure people have this information? Yes. Okay, thank you. Boom. Nothing goes into the actual editorial process that has not had a human fact-checked. Right? And so think about it as a partnership, not as AI now being over your life. But I think a way that newsrooms, especially local newsrooms, can be helpful is in helping our communities understand AI when they see it.
Okay.
because I am growing increasingly concerned, particularly when I talk to my own aunt about her not knowing when she is seen and knowing AI. And that is very scary for me. Because we know that AI is not just being used online. We know that those tools are also being used to call you and say, hey, this is the IRS. You owe us $500. Please give us that money today. Wow. And that is not, in fact, the IRS, because the IRS would never call you. But not everybody knows that. And so newsrooms thinking about how our communities are going to navigate these changing systems, the guides that we can write to help people navigate those systems, and also talk about a partnership. Newsrooms and libraries partnering together to do AI education would be something I would love to see happening all across the country right now.
That's powerful. We've heard from Documented earlier that they're partnering in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Library System here in Philadelphia at WHYY. We partner with the Free Library of Philadelphia, so that's great to know because we're onto something, but the uniqueness, and I wanted to amplify what you said earlier. In my past life when I was a social media manager and really managing communication on digital platforms, the most effective communication, even as a digital strategist, was all of the offline communication. Yep. So that's just a message I think we've heard as a through line with this conference, that we need to put the phones down, we need to go outside, we need to go show up where communities are. And to me, it really feels like basics reporting 101, that COVID and all this technology has kind of created a barrier, if you will, for journalists and newsrooms and the community. And it's really kind of just getting back to that spirit. So my next question along that line, what excites you about the merging of local news, civic news, community engagement? What gets you excited? Because you've built this in to your DNA of your professional accomplishments, but what is it for you personally that excites you about this work?
There are two things. We talked about, there were two questions I want to merge that came from the audience on the last panel. I am seeing so many incredibly talented and gifted Black folks build platforms in their countries all across the country, and that matters. It is important. It is changing the landscape of journalism because they are bringing things that have been known in our communities already to impact and to bring more impactful journalism to communities that raise them, right? There's really something beautiful about building something in a city that you call your home. So I would say that that's the first thing. And the second thing is that there is a beautiful part about being right in the middle of your life, is that I'm going to get to see people build things because I built something, because they were inspired by it. So it makes me tear up a little bit. They were inspired by something I did because I got to build this because I was inspired by someone who came ahead of me, right? I don't exist unless the Black press exists. I don't exist unless the incredible entrepreneurs of the city of Detroit that mentored me existed. I would not have known my capacity without those people. And so now, hopefully, for someone feels that in watching my work. And I know that that's happening. And for me, that is enough reason for me to keep going and to keep building, because there needs to be someone that's building something so someone else knows it is possible.
Beautiful. Was there a particular person that sparked you in this moment where I know I can see you tearing up? You can't see her on stage, but who's that person?
Sure. So when I left Clear Channel, I really was ready to leave, and I sort of just jumped into a job. But at the same time, I really wanted to stay working in communications and doing this kind of work. And so I started a company. This is in the beginning of social media. So I started a social media company. And there was a family that had a production company, a concert production company. And they were, I met them through the radio station, and I called the son and I said, hey, so I started this social media company, and I didn't really know what I was doing, y'all. I read a guide on Google on how to do social media. And I said, well, you all hire me, you can pay me $100 a week, but I want you to teach me how to do what you all do. And he said, okay, sure. And so there started a 5-year-long relationship where I ran social media for their company. But what the great part of that is that I got to meet his mother, Shahida Mausi, who runs a company called The Right Productions, one of the last black concert promoters in the country, because they've all been bought out by larger promoters, and by Live Nation. And she didn't just teach me what she did. She taught me all of the ways that she has used her vast career to rebuild and reimagine her life. Because she used to be the executive director of YMCA, and now she has a production company. And she taught me that, everything you learn, you're building chains on top of, right? And so she taught me, my first knowledge about how to build a budget came from her. My first knowledge about how to run a full operation with hundreds of people working for you came from her. And so what started off as an incredible business relationship is now my surrogate mother, a woman who I spend all my Christmases with. And so, you never know who you're meeting and how they're going to impact your life. That's why my grandmother said you better act right no matter what room you walk in. So
we have some students here today, and obviously listening in. They're waving at you. Yep. So what advice would you give to student journalists and those folks emerging within the field in general?
Learn every part of the business. J School, this is changing, but I think J Schools have been short-sighted in not teaching the entire thing. Because journalism, especially now, requires you to understand the business end of operations. And you're just better served from understanding it at this point. No matter who you work for your audience, right? Like, there's a person who signs your check. But there is an audience, a community that needs that information. And those are the folks you should feel accountable to, not to the person who signs your check. And I say there's a person who signed checks. Those folks that worked for us are accountable to our neighbors. And so hold that really closely, no matter how large or small the organization is that you work for. And then thirdly is that if you feel that you are no longer passionate about this work, think about that. Consider that. It is never enough to say, well, I went to school to do this, so I'm just going to do it for the rest of my life. You live in a world with endless opportunity, endless possibilities for you to rearrange and change your life. You can use these skills in a million ways. And though I want you to stay in journalism for the rest of your life because we need you, I also want you to make sure that you are not just serving an industry, that you are also remember that you are a person who also deserves service and deserves to be able to live out in your full passion.
Really great advice. Thinking about how technology's played a role in your work with Outlier and then since, I'm curious, pre this work of developing distribution strategies for communities, did you have technology experience at all? So where did this all come from? Let's go back a little bit.
Does talking too much on AOL Messenger count? I don't know. I think like everyone who is sort of in my age group, you came up as the things were evolving next to you, right? I joined Facebook when you could only be a college student, when you needed a college email address to join. So all of this has been happening to me and around me. And so I feel like we didn't get a choice. It was just like, well, how am I going to keep up with my friends at Morehouse and Howard if I'm not on Facebook? So I guess I'll join Facebook. And I did have to be forced to join Facebook, by the way. I did not want to join. I was like, what is this? It's so stupid. I could keep writing you long form letters. But those things have been happening to me. And I think my interest has never been in technology. It has been in keeping up with people. I wanted to be where my friends were. I wanted to be where the interesting things were happening, where people were talking about things that matter, where I can figure out how to learn how the world was evolving. And then I think especially once things like Twitter, or the organization formerly known as Twitter came, it expanded the world of opportunity. All of a sudden, I was not just meeting journalists from up the street. I was meeting journalists from all over the world and learning how journalism was being used and distributed in places that did not have press freedom. That really changed how I thought we should be doing things here, well ahead of the world that we live in currently. So technology has been a portal for me. more than a thing that I am trying to understand. I'm just trying to get through the door to figure out what's on the other side.
That makes good sense to me. Going back to trust and news gathering, I'm so curious from your perspective, what do you find as a trustworthy news source in 2025? And is that like looking at different platforms, or is that particular news sources like a company? And how do you kind of navigate trust within the news ecosystem?
Verify and verify again. I am at the point now where I need to see not just what is being said, particularly if we talk about politics of the day. Let's talk about that. I don't want to just hear from one news organization. I don't want to just hear from U.S.-based news services. I really want to see a global perspective. I want to see how the things that we do here impact other places. Because I think for too long I lived in a very narrow view of what being an American meant. And you can walk down the street and get in your car and drive to your house and go to your Target and blah, 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 and all of these things, never thinking about what are the tools that make all of those things possible for you to have, we're going to use this word again, very little friction in your American life. And so once I wanted to explore what gave me this amount of sort of ease in my day, I needed to broaden who I was getting my news from, because I needed to know who was holding the friction I wasn't holding. And nothing changed my worldview more than asking myself that question. And so it has required me to expand where I find news, also to expand that it won't just be from organizations, right? We live in a world where there are people doing freelance journalism, that there are people who are building platforms that are one person, who are incredibly useful. They don't have the whole story, but they have a piece of the story. And so news gathering and news consuming is often like a puzzle. You are trying to piece together a story for yourself as well, right? Because you want to hear a full, complete story. And seldom are we able to have a full, complete story in one article, right? Because also stories evolve. Stories are living things. They have evolution. We talked earlier, someone mentioned a story that had happened that there hadn't been enough follow-up on. Mm-hmm. Following up is important, right? And so if I don't see a follow-up in your organizations or over here, I go look for the follow-up over here.
Do you make sure to read any particular news sources every day?
Well, I'm no longer an outlier, but I do read Outlier's newsletter every single day because they moved to an everyday model after I left. So I'm evolving with them as well. I still check in to almost every Detroit news organization, if not every day, every other day, because though I'm not at home, my heart is always at home, and I need to know what they're over there doing if I need to go back. And then everything else is sort of like a microcosm of a bunch of things that fall into my life. I read a lot of local news from places I have never lived in, because I know a lot of people building news organizations, and it also helps me to understand how other people are communicating and talking to their audiences, but more importantly, where there are through lines. The housing challenges that exist in Philly exist in Baltimore. The public safety issues that exist in Chicago exist in Detroit. And that allows me to be able to see where there could be collaboration, how we can bring tools from one place to another place, but also how legislation works, not just in one place, but it is picked up and brought to other places and used in the same exact way in the exact same communities to create the exact same harm.
You know, when we think about careers and we think about a journey, and Candice has been on a very unique journey, I'm so curious, would you have done anything differently?
This is sort of that thing, right? You can't move the ball, because if you move it, the players move just so slightly. And you don't, like if I decided not to take a job I didn't like, I'd never get to Sarah. There you go. Right? And we never get to build Outlier together. I never get to meet you. There are so many things that have happened in my life that the challenges, the places I didn't want to be, were just as useful as the places I loved being. So no, I would keep it exactly the same.
I love that answer. I absolutely love that answer, because there's always lessons learned. So I'm going to come up with a follow-up question and say, in one of my themes that I like to talk about professional careers and journeys is there's valleys and there are peaks. And I've had more valleys than I've had peaks. We always talk about the peaks. We don't talk enough about the valleys. And for folks that are emerging in the field, students, and also people who are taking a leap to engage in innovation and don't necessarily have a roadmap, if you could talk a little bit about the valleys and how did you navigate through any valleys there or any challenges or roadblocks that you experienced?
The valleys are so many, and you are seldom warned that you're headed into a valley. All of a sudden you find yourself up, you look up and realize that the sun is just a bit dimmer, right? I believe so deeply in the future, not just for myself, but it is also what is holding me in this moment of unraveling in this nation. I believe so truly deeply in the future, and that if I keep moving forward, I will build something useful, not just for myself, but for other people, that I know I have to keep walking through the valley. I might not know where I'm going. I might feel like it's too foggy. I'm often scared. Let me say that again. I am often scared. I am not doing it because I'm necessarily without fear. I'm doing it because I have to, because I know what the peak feels like. I know how sunny the peak is, how beautiful it is. But more importantly, the valley is where you do all your learning. I would not have known how to operate Outlier with $1 million in the bank if I didn't know how to operate Outlier with $20,000 in the bank and payroll due the next day and another bill due the next day. That was what taught me how, when the $1 million hit in the bank, one, to be grateful that there was $1 million in the bank, how to be resourceful and responsible with that money, not to get the $1 million and say, okay, well, now we're just going to hire everybody and do everything that we ever wanted to do. Oh, no, calm down, stay slow, right? But also, you will emerge. I had a dear friend of mine in 2020 when the world was in crisis, right? I was having one of these professional moments where everything was just going right. And it scared me to no end. I was like, I felt so bad. I didn't want to tell anybody. And I happened to tell her something good. She's like, why did you post this on Facebook? How come you're not telling anybody this? I said, well, everybody is suffering and struggling. And I'm going to get on Facebook and be like, hey, my life is great. And she said to me something that I really hold close to my heart. She said, do you remember in 2008 when your mother died? And we had this year in 2008 when my mom died and all of my friends were starting to get married. So they were having weddings and bridal showers and engagement parties. And I had to go to those things in deep grief. And she said, and you showed up for everybody. And you were there. And so now that moment is happening. That is life, baby. Everybody, sometimes you're in the valley and you're in the peak and you're in the peak and you're in the valley. And also something that my therapist said to me that was really valuable at that time. Success and failure feel different, but they weigh the same. That really put something in my brain that is stuck there, right? Because it also means that both success and failure are responsibilities that we have to hold the same. And we have to care for the same. Yeah.
Well, we're winding down, and I want to say the next time we meet for a fireside chat, we're going to get a little fire, even if it's a little fake fire, and we'll put it down here because I feel the warmth. I feel the love from Candice. I'm going to let you have the last word. And so my last question to you is, what general life lesson would you like to share with our audience and with those listening in?
Whatever it is that you have been called here to do by whoever called you to do it, go do it. We need your work. Don't be scared to put it out. Don't let anybody tell you it's not good enough. In fact, don't even tell anybody you're going to do it. Just go do it. We need everybody's action to be actionable. Not just thoughts in your head, not just dreams that you're dreaming, but real things that you are putting into the world. And there's no big and small in that. There is just doing. There is not doing, and there is doing. Go do your work.
Thank you, Candice Fortman, for enlightening us today. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is the WHYY News Civic News Summit. It was made possible by WHYY, the NICE program, which is the News and Information Community Exchange, Bridging Blocks, which is supported by the Sutherland family, and Every Voice, Every Vote, which is a powerful grouping of about 70 organizations comprised of newsrooms locally in Philadelphia and nonprofit organizations who've come together to spearhead a reporting and community engagement project funded by multiple funders such as Lenfest, Wincoat, William Penn Foundation, and the list goes on. Google Every Voice, Every Vote to learn more. And we appreciate you all tuning in and being a part of this important discussion around civic news. Thank you for your participation. And thank you, Candice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, folks, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So if we have some coffee out front and refreshments, 10 minutes. Thank you.